In the late 1950s, something unthinkable happened inside the Soviet Union. An entire city inside the nation was erased without a single record. And no, it was not Chernobyl. What happened was an internal catastrophe and one of the most chilling cover-ups in modern history. There were no emergency broadcasts, no headlines in the papers, no orders to evacuate. Even the maps were altered and the records rewritten. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of people were unknowingly exposed to a danger they were never warned about, while the city started crumbling. The infamous place was known as Chelyabinsk 40, or at least that's what the Soviet government called it. But unlike other cities inside the nation, Chelyabinsk 40 was a closed nuclear city, which would later be called Chelyabinsk 65 and now known as Ozyorsk. But the city would remain absent from maps, inaccessible to outsiders, and guarded as tightly as any military base. The purpose of this city was just one thing: produce plutonium for the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons program. The entire project was overseen by a facility known as the Mayak Production Association. And to build it, the Soviet facility relied on forced labor. More than 40,000 Gulag prisoners and prisoners of war were used to bring the secret nuclear city of Chelyabinsk 40 into existence. But in 1957, something went catastrophically wrong. When the first reports reached the West, the guesses were grim. Many believed the Soviet Union had suffered a catastrophic nuclear weapons failure, something like a botched test or even a chain reaction explosion. But the truth was different, and in some ways, just as deadly. What actually exploded wasn't a bomb. It was an underground storage tank filled with high-level liquid radioactive waste containing strontium and cesium. The blast was chemical, not nuclear, but the fallout was devastating. A failed cooling system allowed the waste to overheat. Temperatures climbed to nearly 660 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the tank ruptured. And on September 29, 1957, the explosion sent a massive radioactive cloud into the air, contaminating vast areas and drifting across the southern Ural region, while the world was left guessing what had really happened. Entire villages were poisoned. Rivers were contaminated. Soil became lethal. Air carried invisible particles that would lodge inside human bodies for decades. Approximately 9,000 square miles of land were contaminated, affecting over 200 villages and towns. The accident was a level 6 event on the International Nuclear Event Scale, yet not a single public warning was issued. There was not a single emergency broadcast or even an evacuation announcement. People were left without a single piece of information while they were moving on with their daily lives. For days, civilians went about their routines. Children played outside, farmers worked the land, families drank contaminated water. Weeks later, some villages were evacuated quietly without any explanation. However, many other villages were ignored. People soon began falling ill. They suffered from chronic radiation syndrome, increased cancer rates, birth defects, and severe health issues. Many experienced infertility, miscarriages, or gave birth to children with severe long-term health problems. Some even faced hair loss, burning sensation on their body, and even sudden deaths. Even after all these, doctors were instructed not to record radiation as a cause. To make it worse, patients were told they had blood disorders or unknown illnesses. But this disaster didn't just harm bodies and the ecosystem. It was about to erase the whole region from existence. Instead of acknowledging the explosion, Soviet authorities implemented a strategy of systematic denial. Maps were redrawn to remove affected settlements. Scientific papers were classified. Medical data was sealed. The contaminated region was renamed the East Ural Radioactive Trace, a technical term designed to avoid public scrutiny. Internationally, nothing was reported. Domestically, silence was enforced. For years, even decades, citizens living in the fallout zone had no idea what they had been exposed to. The Soviet Union in the 1950s was locked in a nuclear arms race with the United States. Admitting a failure at a plutonium facility would have meant revealing operational weaknesses, acknowledging environmental contamination, undermining the image of technological supremacy. So the disaster was reframed as something that had never happened. Chelyabinsk 40 wasn't discussed because officially it wasn't there. The city didn't vanish because it was destroyed. It vanished because acknowledging it was more dangerous than erasing it. Soviet scientists understood the scale of the catastrophe almost immediately. Radiation levels were measured, health impacts documented, but their work was classified. Speaking publicly meant professional exile or worse. Some researchers attempted to preserve records quietly, hoping one day the truth would emerge. Others complied, trapped inside a system where silence was survival. This wasn't ignorance. This was forced obedience. The disaster remained hidden until the late 1970s, when Soviet biologist Boris Medvedev began publishing accounts in the West. Medvedev was a famous agronomist, biologist, historian, and dissident. He used satellite imagery. He declassified documents and even managed to take survivor testimonies. Slowly, the outline of the truth became undeniable. By then, the damage was irreversible. The region remains one of the most contaminated places on Earth. The catastrophic incident, finally labeled as Kishtim disaster, wasn't just a nuclear accident. It was a demonstration of how power operates when accountability disappears, when information is treated as a threat, when citizens are considered expendable, when erasing a city is easier than admitting a mistake. The most frightening part wasn't the explosion. It was how effectively it was erased. Today, Ozyorsk still exists. It has buildings, schools, and hospitals. But its history remains fractured. Many residents only learned the truth decades later. Others never did. And the land itself continues to carry the memory silently, permanently. Because when a government decides a city doesn't exist, reality doesn't disappear. It just waits.